So, if you read this book, one of the things that the author Ismail Vadi mentions is that before the establishment of the Lenasia Youth League in 1982, there were important events that laid a foundation for the establishment of the Youth League. And those events in 1980 really brought out several leaders, particularly at high schools across Lenasia. It was the 1980 schools boycott that really brought out several leaders at several of the schools and laid the basis for what later became the Lenasia Youth League 2 years later. So really, to set the scene of 1980 and how those activities unfolded, we're going to ask one of those leaders who emerged at Trinity High School to come up and tell us what it was like and to recall those days in 1980. Firdaus Bulbul. So I'm told you have to hold both microphones.
So 2 microphones and several pieces of paper. That's going to be interesting. Thank you. Not that we didn't know how to do many things at the same time, right? We could toy, we could sing, we could pull people out of classrooms, we could say equal rights whilst others said big corn bites. Anybody remember that? When these little kids were like, why are you saying big corn bites, big corn bites? And we were going, no, it's equal rights, equal rights. That was what we were talking about. We talk about, we make bonfires out of haystacks. Anybody remember that placard? Shabir. Shabir is not here, but there was a certain gentleman called Haystack who really terrorized us. And somebody put out a placard that says, we make bonfire out of haystacks. I think these are things on the anecdotal side that we should remember. We also remember that the song Another Brick in the Wall, Pink Floyd, was banned because we don't need no education. It also talks to just the ridiculousness of the apartheid system and the regime and what they thought and how quickly they could ban something like a song. And we were singing that, of course, all the time. And so the notorious haystack, and if anybody remembers Peterson, and Rajesh just said to me, Jits, that Peterson actually in the end, during Codesa, was driving you around. How different times are. This is the same Peterson we were dead scared of who came to my home at 4 a.m. and detained me. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and Yunus, you will keep time and you'll tell me when to stop it because you know I'm a performer and it's going to go on forever. And that's why I have pink in my hair, Valley Musa, so that people know that it's Firdaus Bulbul, yeah? The outlandish one. And here I am at 4 o'clock in the morning. I think we had just returned from Dr. Variava's home. He was detained and his father was ill. And I'm trying to recall, since it's 42 years ago, whether it was the day his dad had passed away or if it was that he was sick. Dr. Variava, his mother, and my father are cousins. So we had gone to the house. And at 4 o'clock in the morning, somebody knocked on our door. I'm a really tight sleeper. Those who know me, like my daughter Shaista, I don't wake up. I really love to sleep. But that 4 o'clock in the morning knock on the door actually woke me up. And I went to the door, and it wasn't the days of bolting your doors and having security and all kinds of things. You know, it's just one key, you open the door. And I unlocked the door, and my dad came a little bit bewildered, confused. I mean, it is 4 o'clock in the morning on a cold winter's morning. Who is knocking at our door? Thinking about Dr. Variava's dad, I think he also just, you know, automatically opened the door. And there they were, these special branch, as we call them, the SBs. And they were looking for Firdaus Bulbul. My father tried to pretend that there was no Firdaus Bulbul. You've got the wrong place. And he tried to tell them it's up the road on the other side of Lillian. And then I think he remembered that I have a cousin called Firoza, who is at 18 Lillian Road. We're at 29A Lillian Road. And so better not let him go that way. And he's like, but they knew, of course, the house. They had already been watching us. They'd been parked outside the home, so they knew this was the house. My mother then came. I shared a bedroom with my sister, my elder sister. So my mother came into the bedroom. I had, remember, already opened the door. So I got back into bed, and my mother came and she tried to cover me with the blankets and sit on top of me to pretend that there was nobody on that bed. I mean, it was almost ridiculous, right? But quite shocking too. And so they knew my sister was there, and there had to be somebody in this bed. And then they pulled me out and then ransacked my room, but more especially my school bag. And I think they might have found a copy somewhere of the Freedom Charter. They told my father, you don't know who this woman is. This is not your daughter. She's a communist. You have no idea what she's up to. And of course, they didn't really know us. I was traveling every day to Lenz from Fordsburg. My activism was in Lenasia, getting back on a bus, going back home, where everything was kind of hunky-dory. Nobody knew what was going on, because the politics was kind of a little bit further from the house. Except that my mother, one day, was hanging washing in our home in Fordsburg, and the backyards of all these little houses kind of faced each other. And she overheard a teacher telling his brother to be careful about the boycotts, and especially that Firoz Bulbulia, don't be like her. So my mother had already heard the story, unbeknown to me. I was pretending like I was just a good student going to school every day, not that I was actually on boycott. So when they came, by now she knew, and she was like, already when I was in standard 8, which was grade 10, I had some what would be deemed political banned material that I was reading, and my mother saw it and got really terrified, took it from me, and at that time used to have fires in the house, the stove fire, and she threw it into the fire. I was like, what are you doing, mother? And it totally shocked me, but it also made me understand that there were some things that you do not share at home. And how I wished I was Amina Kachalia's daughter, or any other stalwart who was able to go out and do the work that needed to be done without being afraid of coming home. And I would say to people that I'm actually sometimes more scared of my mother than I am of the special branch. And these are realities. I think these are anecdotes that people need to know, that we grew up in a very difficult time. And some people had the pleasure and the privilege of doing the work that needed to be done with the support of family. Some of us had to really pretend that we were something else and get out when we could. And so there was this telephone call. We didn't have mobile phones, so I'm actually not quite sure how that call came. And I was told that I needed to meet some comrades in Bosmont. And all I said to the people on the other side, please don't tell Aziz, because Aziz, his mother is my grandmother's sister, so he's my cousin. So I don't want people to know that I'm coming to Bosmont and then to Rivoli and organizing. And of course I arrived there, and who's sitting in the car but Aziz, my cousin, who, as most of you would know, was quite an activist in Bosmont. So the activism started, for me, I think I was in standard 6 in 1976, grade 8. The 76 uprisings had really impacted me. I remember listening every day to what was happening. I would hide in the room just to be able to pick up story. I also started reading, and for the young people here, literature was banned. You couldn't just read. So you had to find a way of getting text. And so we would sit and hide somewhere in a room and read whatever we could, and I read everything. Because so much was banned and you couldn't get your hands on, I would read about, the Black Panther movement in the US, I'd read about Vietnam, I'd read about Mahatma Gandhi. So the political awakening was when I was in standard 6. I was at Rudapur at school. There was an amazing teacher called Iqbal Arif, who had sadly passed away during the first bout of COVID. He was my English teacher, and I think he was really very influential in my life. The other people, of course, at the time were Jeremy Karodia is here, Faisal Burani, and a group of other young activists. I see Abbas right at the back. But people that influenced our thinking, gave us alternative things to read, and rallies to go to. And I'm sure many of you remember the song, A Working Class Hero is Something to Be. And that's John Lennon. And I actually took down the words just for us to be reminded of a time when we were all together. We attended these rallies here in Lenasia. We were being followed. We didn't know by the special branch. Of course, they then found us. We were detained. In Trinity, it was myself and several others, but the very good friend that I always talk about and who had just gone back to the US recently, Rajesh Chiba, I was detained and Rajesh was detained several days after me. I was taken, as I said, on that cold morning, driven from Fordsburg to Protea Police Station and beaten up there by Haystack. It was, I think they used the inside rubber of a tire. So they'd beat you up and you'd have these welts on you. And you're so brazen, you're so brave, like you don't cry. And you're like, okay, you know. I think that frustrated them more because they really wanted you to cry, to break down. And I think at the time, being, again, we look at our little boxes that we tick, an Indian girl child, it was kind of uncommon because of the school boycotts, because we were Indian children and we were colored children, and we were not part of the 76 uprisings, even though in 77, many of you from Lenasia went to the bar, and that was your way of commemorating June 16th. I was in Roodepoort School, so I wasn't here, and I was in Standard 7 at the time. So I'm sketching for you just some of the events of that period. I was trying to ask some of my colleagues, it's 42 years ago, what we remember. Bhaskar reminded me that this stadium was Varacha Stadium and we had boycotted it. So it wasn't a place that we would be at, but we are taking over, reclaiming spaces, and that is important too. And on that day in April, when I think it was in the Western Cape where the boycotts actually started, I recall that we were in our class with Mr. Lachman, if anybody remember him, and we were talking about the boycotts. And I asked him what we should do. And he said, well, I can't tell you what to do, but if I were you, I would go out. And it was interesting because it gave us the impetus to stand up and do what needed to be done. And Rajesh Chiba reminds me that I came out of my class into his class. They were in the science lab. And I'd gone up to him and said, we need to do something. And so that was how we all started gathering and walking out of our classrooms and knocking on the doors of every other classroom. And some teachers were very supportive and pushed, is it time? Some teachers were very supportive and pushed us and said, go ahead and do it. Others, as you know, we had pumps and spies, etc. And they were watching us. So it's funny that after all of that, I do become a teacher. And I teach Afrikaans at the time. And the kids were like, how are you teaching Afrikaans? And you know, we were saying, you need to know the language of the oppressor. Julle moet dit verstaan. And you brought out Adam Small and other people so that they could really get to grips with what was happening in our country. This was important for us. So I don't want to waste more time or take up too much time. Eunice is so kind, always so sweet and smiley. Like, it's not like, Fidelis, your time is up. But I think Vali Musa's looking at me too. So I want to pay homage to you, Vadi, for this amazing book that got me sitting up in the middle of the night, the manuscript, and just reading about the comrades and what people had done, and how that 1980 obviously spurred on so many other activities. But maybe what I will leave with all of us today is, what are we doing now? What are we doing now when we see what is happening in our country? When we know that we were activists irrespective, when we stood up and did what needed to be done without fear at the time, although we were very afraid, but we did what needed to be done. What are we doing now? I was in Lebanon a few years ago, and what they did, and I think maybe Vadi should think about this, and those of you who stood up who were part of the cover, is actually to take photographs of the people, the martyrs, and the activists and place them around Lenasia so people are reminded every single day about what people did. And maybe then we will rethink when we try to get corrupted or co-opted and when we start doing the wrong thing. Because those pictures, those faces will be a reminder of the activism of all of you, especially as we realize how people have voted in the last elections. Please think about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Firdaus. Now, you know, my wife, Amina, was at Trinity School. And, and she asked me, how much time did I give you? And I said, well, 10 minutes. And she said, please give Firdaus 3 more minutes to sing We Shall Overcome. So when you got to look at the view from here, when I look at all of you. A room full of old lions. It's quite a view, Firdaus.
Well, I'm not an old lion. I'm a lion.
And I'm sure that many of you, if you had the youth and you had the energy, I'm sure your mind would wrap around what you would be like as an activist today. How you would organize the way you did back in 1982 when you set up the Lenasia Youth League, with all that energy and all that bravado. But surely we have to turn to the youth of today and ask ourselves the question, do they have the will and do they have the energy to carry on the important work that needs to be done? We'll answer that question in the next few minutes when we listen to Irfan Mangera. Irfan?
Amandla! Amandla! Uncle Yunus, I know you said many people in this room are gray and old, but I think there's still a youthful exuberance here. From when we came in, there was so much of energy, so much of camaraderie being shared, and I think that's something that we need to cherish and also teach on how we can take that forward. Uncle Ismail asked me to speak on some of the challenges and lessons learned from organizing today. And for those that don't know, I am the youth programs manager at the Amit Kathrada Foundation. The foundation now has over 400 members in the last 3 years. And over 25 community clubs that we've established across the province of Gauteng. So, and yes, I think it deserves a clap because there's so much of negativity surrounding young people today. Young people are lazy. Where are the youth? They're just interested in the challenges we face. But I think that's an incorrect assessment. And the program today is testament to that particular, that notion. There's one thing that I wanted to start with, and it's a quote by Tessa Dooms that I want everyone to think about for this moment. And it reads, are we ready to vote for a 25-year-old president of South Africa? If your instinctive answer is no, before knowing anything about that person, other than their age, it is worth asking what inherent biases do we each hold and prepositions do we make about young people? And that's something that I think many of you could have challenged today and perhaps going into the next few years coming up to elections. So just for a second or 30 seconds, think about that. The reason I say this is because young people are organizing. We are in the streets, protest happens in communities all the time, various forms of protest, art, etc. And it's what we do to support that kind of youth development work. I'm going to break up. It's a bit difficult with two mics, but yeah. So I'm also on the youth leadership program on the Apolitical Academy. It's a fellowship for young people who want to take up public office. Through this fellowship, we've learned about one particular thing. What is the story of me? What is the story of us? And what is the story of now? And I think the lessons will be explained through this. Growing up in Lenz, I've always known Lenz. I was fortunate enough to start community-based work because of teachers. I think, like Firdaus mentioned, teachers did encourage it. But there wasn't really a political consciousness to it. It was just go and do good work in the community. So we did a lot of volunteering, community-based projects, relief work, and so on. And thereafter, I think it got into sport. So Lenz Cricket Stadium was a huge home for me for a number of years. And I call it a home because through the 3 to 5 years that I was there, and from the age of 16 on the executive committee there, was getting young people to come and play sport again, and particularly cricket, which was dying. Lenz Cricket Club officials, some of them are here, Crescent Cricket Club, will say the same thing. We had huge influx of drugs and all of that. And these are those social elements that make organizing so much more difficult. But it was possible. And leaving the club with 5 teams showed that young people want to do something if you give them the space and platform to do so. Going into university was fees must fall. And that is a generation that now I've grew up with. So that's the only point in my life where political consciousness started happening. Not during the Lenz time. And I think it's a soft critique, Uncle Ismail, because I note in the book there's this element of succession planning from yourself, from many other of the leaders of the time. And I don't think that happened post-democracy, particularly with my generation who were born into democracy. So it's a soft critique for everyone here to just think about what then are we doing to support those young people in growing. And Uncle Ismail has been there, I must say, in the rebuilding of this program at the AKF, he has been there to mentor. But I think there's an element of more that can be done. The challenge largely we face today is systemic. To organize in communities, the book was phenomenal, and I think I was just very moved and emotional by it, because I could see, I think it does deserve a hand, because all of you, I could put faces to the activism that was done. And like I said, I could put faces to it now and see what was Sidna doing, what was Charmaine doing, what was all the aunties and uncles doing. And and I say this, you know, growing up in Lenz, that's how we taught, you know, it's part of the respect that we want to give those that are older than us. But I could start putting context to the work being done. And I think Sean, as a mentor at the AKF, always reminds us that you're not going to just win people over to some political idea or ideal. You have to start building a base in sport, through the cultural activities, and that came through in the things around the netball tournaments and all of that was done. And we hope to emulate that, and we are trying to do some of it. But again, the systemic challenge comes that we don't have the kind of financial support. You all know today that everything is expensive. Just a tank of petrol today is far beyond what it would have cost way back. And that alone makes it so difficult to organize. The resources that many organized with had families cooking, for example, for the activists who came. We do have elements of that, but because we're constrained, and even those families are constrained, it's often very difficult for us to do that type of work. And that also is coupled with, as Firdaus was saying, you know, the rise in very right-wing conservative politics around the world. Young women are finding it even more difficult to organize. When we started the Lenz Youth Club here, we managed to pull through 20, 30 youth at a time. And even in my mom's year, we had meetings in our garage, we had movie screenings in our lounge, a big mess, but it was worth it. But it's difficult to keep that consistency because there's not enough resources to support those young people. In addition, is this very individualistic space that we're in and culture that we're in. You all built camaraderie, you built collectivism, and it took time and effort. Unfortunately, today, we are very individualistic in our approach to life. And we're not rooting we say, you know, values of non-racialism, non-sexism, of collectivism. But are we living those values is the challenge. And as parents, many of you are here today, how many of you do encourage that? How many of you say, no, go, don't sit here at home. If you're interested, go. Let me support you in doing that. I'll give you the support if it's, you know, paying for transport or food or whatever. I'll do that, but go. And many of us don't do that. And or we sway to the political differences that we have or the religious differences that we have. And that's what's already spearheading the kind of work being done in Lenz. And it's isolating. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed, and we're trying to through the work of conscientization, building, workshops, training, and so on. And some of the youth members are here today. So I think there's an element of us, or rather those who are in leadership, those who have come before us, to still give back through your wisdom. And the story of now, Uncle Yunus, is what do we do to support the struggle of youth today? We said we have 25 youth clubs in this province. Every day, every week, I get communication from youth around the country. We love what you're doing. We see what you're doing. Can we do it? Can we emulate it? And I really wish I could do that. But our budget is very limited. And there's one thing that I think the civil society sector knows very well, is maximizing our impact on the most minimum resource, and perhaps government officials should learn more about that. And that's, I think, a challenge now perhaps to all of us here today. We are trying to do that mobilization work to inspire the hope that's needed in society. And that's something that I think many of you spoke about. There was a rebel in me that somebody mentioned that like you felt that need to join something. When you were introduced to a meeting, you were like, oh no, I agree, I want to be part of it. But that only happens when you start building collective. And I think here is a challenge. On June 16th this year, we are going to mobilize youth. From the Kathrada Foundation, we've mobilized 1,000 young people. And that's a huge feat because it's almost 15 to 20 buses just to get there, which cost us at least 7,000 Rand at minimum per bus. And then that's not even including things like food, where you're picking up young people from 7 a.m. in the morning, taking them the whole day, who want to be there. So a challenge perhaps is to say, if each of us do contribute, if you can financially, please do so. If you can, by giving your time. I know in the last few years, the Cemetery Club meets and we speak of this, you know, there's this, let's exchange, let's see how we can plug and play and come and support you guys. But how does that help? I think it's the how of it that we need to start dealing with, is if in your community you are there, how do you bring together 5 and 10 young people and let us come through with you and start building a club so that grassroots activism can start and be developed in that space. Parna Janda Yaniche Jokana. Vikram was explaining to me again the power of these words. We can't let the flag drop. And I know many of you do know that powerful verse because it was songs that were sung before. Today, we are standing here as the young people who want to lead, who want to make that difference in society. I know politics is not the ideal space for us to go into because you see the violence it is accompanied by. But we challenge ourselves. I mean, there's a whole bunch of youth here at the back there constantly doing the work and saying, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? And I think that's one of the things that we would like to see is the exchange of the generations. 70s to 80s to the Fees Must Fall group, and now us here today, and how do we take that forward? So again, freedom is an ongoing process, and organizing work takes effort and time. And to build that, you need to move away from, I think, the individualistic side of things to the collective side of things. And even in our differences, we will find hope. And I think that's the kind of message and lessons that we've learned from all of this. Constantly seeing the levels of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, in addition to all the violence and everything else, it's very difficult. Challenges today are much more complex than it was back in the 70s and 80s. You all had a clear mission that apartheid needed to end, regardless whether you were Biko in the Black Consciousness movement or in the Congress movement or any of the other movements. You believe that that was the one thing that must be addressed. Today we have multiple, but it's largely and intrinsically tied to economic freedom in our lifetime. So I'm hoping, and I'm inspired by this turnout, but I'm hoping that this turnout transpires into something more concrete with the youth program, Uncle Ismail, because there's a huge opportunity to take this program nationally, take the values that we're standing for nationally, and contribute to building that new generation of young organizers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Irfan. Irfan, you are asking if it's not you, then who? It has to be you people. It has to be you people. Because if it's not you, then the worst elements of our society will rise into leadership position. And then we'll see the real gangster state emerge. And we can't let that happen. So it has to be you. Ismail, I don't know why you thought you're going to get only 20 people. Now it's the third time we've had to put chairs out. I mean, don't you have confidence in your own book? I mean, you put 20 chairs here. It's the third, but it's wonderful to see all the chairs being added. It's a terrific turnout. And it's great to see you all here. Now, from the time of the establishment of the Lenasia Youth League, right, in 1982, there's one person who's really kept an eye and tracked all the developments and the evolution of the youth movement in Lenz. He is so connected to everybody that he's got a wonderful overview of how this movement developed. He is the deputy chairperson of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, and I'd like to call on Mandla Nkomfe to address you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I thought my turn was still coming, and the time is now. No, thank you very much, Chair, and the Program Director. The leadership of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, which is here. I only see Comrade Prema, and it's good to see our old comrade of old times, Comrade Trevor Oosterweg from the Cape Youth Congress. And the veterans of our movement, I only see two here, Comrade Prema and Comrade Vali. And Vali doesn't believe that he's a veteran of our movement. He is indeed. And comrades and activists. So my name is Mandla Nkomfe. Ordinarily, I come from Soweto, from the Soweto Youth Congress. I have a very long association with the Lenasia Youth League, with a whole range of comrades, including, I see only, there are a lot of them. Rashid Sidat is here. Now, and thank you very much for inviting me to the launch of this book. It's very timely, because I think there are a lot of issues that are being raised in the book, and it gives you a sense for me as to who are these young lions in the first instance? Where did they come from? Did they just crop up? What was their inclination? And what was their socio-economic background? And actually, how did it come that they too earned the honor of being called the young lions of Oliver Tambo? Because they were linked to broader struggles in Soweto, in Mamelodi, in Utenek, and everywhere. So this book, I think it's very timely for me, Ismail. There's a lot we can say about the comrades. So the young lions, as we understand them, and that Ismail Vadi has ably and fondly recorded their story, can actually be said to be also architects and the builders of a new South Africa. And in their own way, they created something bigger than themselves. So they thought that they were just here in Lenz, in this section, on that section. But something that they participated in was much more bigger, because they participated through their actions in the building of a national movement. A national movement in two senses: in democratic sense, in that it crossed across communities, non-racial in its inclination, and national in a sense that it touched the length and breadth of our country, as it were. So this book, as I read it, for me, and the approach that has been taken, is really so in a way, it's a book that's not written by Ismail. It is a book that is written by the participants themselves, because you hear their voices, they assert their agency in the liberation process, and they as the youth in Soweto or in Guamashu, the slogan was one: freedom in our lifetime. So that for me it's very important. They did participate in the UDF campaigns in many ways, because we had to rely on the cadreship across the board, whether it's a million signature campaign, etc. But I think importantly, it's their participation in the formation of the youth movement in this country. I remember linking up with Trevor Oostewijk, myself and Rashid Sidat. I think we went all over the country dealing with youth issues, international youth year, etc., etc., etc. So what you see today as the ANC Youth League, part of it is that comrades in Lenasia participated in that formation. So that, for me, it's very important. But like it said in the book, there is no facet of our struggle that comrades here didn't participate in. Whether it was in the building of organizations, that is civic associations, youth organizations, and the UDF as it were, on the one part, which is the mass pillar of our struggle. They also participated in the underground of the movement. A lot, I think a lot is written in the book about them. They participated in international work, and very importantly, they participated in the armed action of Umkhonto weSizwe. So they, in a way, rounded all the way. And they were activists, they were cadres in the proper sense of the word. They're just not members only. So that, for me, it's important just to say that. The interesting thing as I get, and it's the comrade that came in here earlier on, just reinforced that point, the first speaker. That these comrades were, in my view, idealists of sorts. A lot of them, you know, you could be, they were what you call, Eric Hobson calls them uncommon people. They were rebels, they were revolutionaries, they were activists, they were idealists. She spoke about Pink Floyd, John Lennon. It's that idealism of the time that was propelling our struggle forward, as it were. And actually that, which I didn't know until I read the book, that people were also reading all sorts of material, which is not political. And I didn't know that Valley could be involved in such things. Have you read James Hadley Chase? have you read anything about Papillon, The Great Escape? And a fascinating work if you read the book about how Vadi was plucked out of prison into continuing with the struggle. It is just the idealism of the youth of the time, revolutionaries, as it were. So the key issue for me, Chairperson, is how do we become lifelong activists, not politicians? There's a role for politics, for politicians' careers, but as activists, and I'm happy the young people are taking over this as such. Now, activism has got one thing. Like, so they were not politicians, ourselves were not politicians, but our primary concern was just to fight for justice, informed by values of compassion, of solidarity, empathy, and the desire to serve. Whatever we're doing, we were serving. It is the duty, basically. So it is important to understand, to go back to this issue of being activists. And I know in the early 90s, a lot of comrades in Lenasia and beyond were disappointed by what came out later on. But it's because maybe they were looking at things narrowly in terms of politics. But it's much more bigger than that. Over time, I think there is some, for me, the great concern is the fact that there is a massive erosion of this great and proud tradition that the comrades in Lenz and elsewhere gave us. The great legacy, the great heritage that is in the Congress movement as a whole. I'm not going to go much to that. And the problem is that this has resulted in us losing our social standing, our political standing, our ethical standing, integrity as a movement, as such. And we are no longer in government in Johannesburg, in Tshwane, and all over the place. So basically, the moral, ethical, and ideological standard of the ANC is, and the appeal basically is waning. It's actually going down. You know, we've become very ordinary, in the very ordinary sense. As a movement, my view is that we used to punch above our weight. We did quite extraordinary things. Oliver Tambo's ANC was progressive. It was universalistic. It was, so it didn't talk to issues of the tribe, to issues of ethnicity, to issues of the region. It actually propelled us to think much more beyond that. I think the movement of today is very ordinary. But it needs extraordinary people as such. So that for me, it's very important. And I think it's been said in the speech earlier on that what we see is the rise of conservative thought. It's a rise of right-wing populism. And there's no rebuttal to those notions by the Congress movement, as it were. But you don't have to be in the Congress movement or in the ANC as a structure to rebut those chauvinistic notions of society and all that. So the first speaker said, what are we doing now? So I want to address two categories of people. One is the youth. But I also want to address the erstwhile young lions who were there with us, who were disappointed in one way or another, etc. That it's time to actually come back. And for me, we come back in the context of being activists. I think the dream has not been realized 28 years on. There are achievements that have been made, massive ones, but there's a greater degree of disappointment out there. So the idea of activism is very, very important. And I want to invite us to that and find many ways of participation. Politics is not the only mode of participation. It's very important. We have to get people into the political process, but there's we need to link up with the cricket, with everything, and all that. I think the youth would actually help us in a great deal around that. Is our democracy under threat? It's common cause. I think it is. With all sorts of corruption, state capture, and everything else. I'm not going to talk about that. So I won't be doing my job, Ismail, if I don't invite comrades and activists to read the document on the conference that, you don't have the document here, the conference that we're going to have in July. So that's a conference for democratic renewal and change, which is in July this year. The theme of it is defending South Africa's constitutional democracy. And I hope we can, in our own study groups, in our small ways, we can have discussions around that and expand this movement of activists, not politicians, activists as such. So, there are two issues there. It's the issue of renewal, is the issue of change. So in the political dispensation that we have, what are the issues that needs renewal? And we need to debate about those things. Where do we have to go back, etc. But what are the areas that needs change as such? So in recent time, the issue of accountability has taken a center stage. So that's one issue that we put here. And I was telling the young people earlier during the week that they must hold people who are in power accountable in many ways. So that's the first thing. Participation and the new modes of politics. I saw, maybe just to paraphrase it, it's an Einstein quote that you can't use old maps to investigate the new territories or something like that. So, and I know I come from a different stock. I tell you about dialectical materialism, historical, all that. But these are new times. How do we look at the new situation? And the young people, and I think somebody spoke about the connections between the old and the new, and the planning, it's not career planning, yeah, something like that. The electoral system. Does the present electoral system promote accountability? And in many ways it doesn't. So we need to look at it in terms of constituency-based elections, etc. The constitution and constitutionalism. One thing that we have is the most progressive constitution in South Africa, with its first level, second, etc., etc. But the ideas, the values, we're not living that constitution. The majority of our people, in my view, are actually literally living outside the constitution because they don't have water, they don't have health facilities, they don't have education, etc. We can't be saying we're living a constitutional democracy if we still have problems like those. Funding of political parties that Comrade Musa has been piloting. Very important. Is there capture? Is there an instance of capture on our political parties? I would actually argue that there is. There's a lot of private interest in that. And the idea of looking anew on the funding would be very important. So activism for me, it's very important. So at the end of the day, comrades, is how do we defend and enhance our democratic life? Because our democratic life is under threat in many ways. What do I say to the young people, to the youth in particular? Not much. service. It's all about service. It's all about duty. It's all about leadership. And I hear people say, it's our time as young people. Sure, man. You won't believe how much we had to wait until Vali Musa goes nationally. But we had to do the work on the ground. You have to, pamphlets there, placards there, street by street, etc. You earn leadership, basically. Even the whole organization, I think, would do the same thing. So those, I think, for me, are very important. But the important thing is that for the youth, the future is yours. So you must fight for it. Don't allow the country to collapse and go into flames, because you are going to inherit that. So there are issues like climate change, and a lot of young people, I think, are involved in that process. So those are the things that we have to deal. But what I can learn, what we learned, that we build organizations. The only bulwark against regression is building resilient organizations. Whatever organization you can do, sports, political, etc., is very important. And I've seen it. I mean, with the AK Ahmad Kathrada Foundation Youth Labs, lots of impact is being made across Gauteng, as it were. So, Ismail, I think the celebration of the 40th anniversary of the Youth League indeed gives us a platform to reflect about our past, which we are doing today, analyze the present, we are doing this today, and also work out the ways of defending the gains that we have had in the last 28 years, so that we don't go back to corruption and state capture as such. So in many ways, therefore, Ismail is actually inviting us to look at the past, but setting the tone for the next national conversation. And I hope we are setting that tone now, and about the kind of South Africa that we want at the end of the day. So with these few words, Chair, I want to congratulate Ismail for the work that he has done, and the comrades that have spoken. I didn't know some of them, but it just gives a very beautiful picture of uncommon people making difficult decisions and contribution in the revolution. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mandla. Now, we did recognize Rehana earlier. I don't know if any of your classmates of that time have pitched up, but if not, please come forward. I know that Dr. Ismail Vadi is also here. Where is Dr. Ismail Vadi? So you're gonna enlighten us about the events on this cover here. Okay, cool. Thank you.
I just want to thank Ismail Vadi just for including us in this very special occasion. It was with a lot of surprise I saw the picture circulating on Facebook. I remember the moment vividly. I don't remember the picture, I don't remember the Indicator article, but what was very interesting of the time was we were the younger generation of the seniors like Kuben and Eunice Akawaya, and we almost idolized them, and they actually did all of the big hard work for that generation. The people in that picture was the Standard 8 class or grade 10 class of Lenz High, most of whom had followed in suit, idolizing many of the great forebears like Kuben, and we watched them and we watched their work. And I remember Kuben driving his car into a armored vehicle and cutting his tongue, us protesting, incarceration of detainees who were writing exams. But in that moment, I think it was a culmination of all of those sacrifices, the sacrifices of our parents, the sacrifices of many, many, many South Africans. And, you know, the kind of tyranny that you lived with at that time, the dogs, I don't think you ever escape living with that tyranny when you see the SAP or you see dogs, sniffer dogs that jump your walls, and you may not even be an activist, and they're coming to check the domestic workers pass, or our parents who were stopped at Van Riemen's pass to have their hair checked or their passbooks checked because they must be legitimately here in Transvaal to work. So for us, that moment, I think vividly was this deep sense of hope, this kind of buoyancy that finally and most certainly victory is coming. And, you know, for my sisters who were taking up the struggle in the dust bowls outside the civic center and boycotting the tricameral elections, for them being shot at directly with gas canisters, you know, that kind of thing was a daily part of the kind of almost normalization of the tyranny that we lived with every single day. And when we saw this picture, all of us started to talk. The group that we still have, the class group, was that experience of what the lived experience was for many of us who grew up in that era. And I'm so delighted that, Vadi, you've done this book, because it is the remembering, it's the never forgetting, that so many people forget about the purpose, why we're here. Lenz High flew the ANC flag, if I remember correctly. And intrinsically in the conversations we had at school was the connection between education and liberation. And on that cover, there's 3 doctors, countless university graduates. And imbibed in that education is intrinsically part of our liberation was that whatever we do, social justice was at the core. Service was at the core, and I think many of us carry through this in our daily lives. So for me, in that moment, as we waited for the message to come, and there was no cell phones, there were lots of kids driving around unlicensed in their vehicles, around the schools, dropping the message, okay, Amit Kathrada is being released. And I remember Zina Dasu was leading this march, and she toyed so hard, her soles of her shoes came off. But vividly in that moment was the idea of hope. And I think we must all carry the purpose, the intrinsic purpose of what that is going to be for all of us, our children. I've got my kids here, that we must weave this idea of purpose into everything we do. And I know Shuaib, in good measure, is doing that as a health practitioner, a doctor.
Assalamu alaikum, shalom, namaste, vanakom, good morning, goeiemorgen. Thank you, Uncle Ismail, for inviting me to say a few words. I think Rihanna has said almost everything I wanted to say. Just that for us as the younger generation coming up, and Kuhen is here in the audience, Asim, we remember the boycotts leading up to that, a few years before that, and our involvement starting to come out of our classes, starting to protest. And we really grew up in a Lenasia where, and this was the Lenasia we knew from the time we were born and we came into Lenz, that was, you know, a place which was in the winter. It was like the winter of our discontent at all the time. We were living in a situation where we were cut off from the world. The news that was fed to us was really the news that people wanted us to be fed. And to get news like the release of Uncle Ahmed from prison had to come through different networks and channels, and we had to find out that there's a march going on. And I remember very vividly that day, and in my own psyche, how deeply that day affected us from this perspective that we're living something that maybe will consume the rest of our lives, to this singular moment of hope and a light at the end of the tunnel, that perhaps there is a way for us to move and see freedom in our lifetime, really. And over those next few years, we saw the materialization of that freedom. And I mean, one of the things we can only say is thank you to the senior activists and the people who really gave their lives and who committed, because we are the beneficiaries of that freedom. We are the ones, as Rihanna says, there are doctors, there are lawyers, there are teachers, there are people where educational opportunities, professional opportunities opened up tremendously after that period. But I think it's also not necessary for us to only look in the past. We have to look in the future and take a lesson from some of the things we found in that past. And I think we need to look for that type of singular moment in our history now. We need that type of moment in our history now. We're really at an impasse. And many of the speakers here have elaborated some of the ways that we need to look forward, building up organizations, building up youth activism. And certainly during COVID, we saw tremendous amounts of activism happening in Lenasia. People being given oxygen, people being hospitalized at home, people being looked after by the community in Lenasia. And that activism is deeply rooted in this community. And I hope with God's help and with the help of the people in this room that we can build up that activism on every level, social, political, sporting, and get people involved again to build a future for all the people of our country. Okay.
Before you go, we'd like you to create a little photo opportunity for us. If you can just hold that up. There we go. Serena, you can take over here.
A round of applause. Thank you so much. I think that was an amazing moment, just going back so many years and still having the kind of special people around us. My name is Arina. I'm chairing the session of this event. At this stage, I'd like to call Obakeng Katse. He's going to do a personal reflection on the book, its meaning and its interpretation. If you can please come forward. Thank you so much. So lovely to have you here. Thank you so much. Am I going to say your time starts now?
Sure, I hope I don't struggle with the two mics. It's like only the young lion. Oh, yes. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Obakeng Katse. I am a youth club organizer at the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. So while listening to everything, I remembered a song and a quote of it that says, "What a system, what a crime. We can't mend it, we must end it today and for all times." You did it in the 80s, you did it during the 76, and we are doing it today. So the struggles that you were fighting for, we thank you for that and we appreciate that. Now today we have our own struggles and we do need a little bit of guidance on how we do that. The youth of today is fighting fees must fall with police shooting at them and so forth. That system is still on and we must end it and end it today. So with fees must fall, I'm also an SRC member at the University of South Africa. The things we go through, it's a lot. So I read somewhere in the book that Uncle Comrade mentions that you were also fighting to have SRCs in place, right? We do have those SRCs in place today, but management is not working with us. The government is not working with us to improve the education system that we have today. When you raise your concerns, they send private security and cops to fight with you. So now, with this book, I started reading it a few weeks ago, and it felt like I had made a few new friends, the young lions of then commemorating and talking to me and guiding me on my activism, especially with everything that Ifan puts me through at the office. It's a lot. So it was a guidance on how do we, as the youth of today, handle our issues. And it was so beautiful to see how I related to the stories that were said in that book. So it read, there's a part that says in 1983, my boss, Mr. Bolton, and a few others started a winter warm drive to address an issue of the brutality of poverty in our lifetime currently. I can say to you now, 39 years later, the young people of Finetown have to sit down and plan a similar winter warm drive to address the same issues. It's also read that in 1982, you had a youth festival. Amid all that was happening, amid the struggles, amid the guns and the sounds that were going on, you planned a festival. Today, we as the Ahmed Kathrada Youth Foundation, Youth Activism Department, are planning a youth parade to the Union Building. So similar, we're trying to get, it says the theme of it was expression, participation, and unity. We are also doing the same thing with over 60 organizations coming together collectively to go to the union buildings on the 16th of June to say to government, we are here, listen to us, we have solutions to your problems also. Involves us, because today a lot of decisions, many decisions are made even without us. So how do we make decisions on my future, even my present, without me involved? So we are going to the union buildings to fight against such. The youth organization is being done through the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation Youth Clubs. We have now 29 youth clubs around Gauteng, the exact number. So youth in their numbers come up together and say, these are the issues we are facing in our communities. And we try our best to try and support them to respond to the issues that they are facing in their different communities. How do we then take the next step to promote their struggles and support their leaders' journey as the elders and the wise that has walked this path before? How can you assist us? How can you guide us? You've done it beautifully, Uncle Ismail, with the book and sharing those stories. But now, how can the young lions in this room also assist and hold our hands through this journey? We need you. We need your guidance, not for you to instruct us on how to do it, sorry, but your guidance. On June 16, we will convene over 78 organizations, and more are still adding on, under the theme Youth Day Parade for Justice and Change. We urge you to join us there in solidarity with the youth of today to demand a better, more caring, more just, and more accountable government. Hold our hands and walk with us. Together as young lions, we can do a lot. The youth is here, they need you, we need your guidance. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Obakeng. That was absolutely amazing. Irfan, you've asked for 2 minutes to say something at this point? Not hard and fast, I'm going to allow it. It's fine. You guys are young. Giving you the opportunity.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. Obakeng, yeah, no, she just joined the foundation a couple of months ago, and already you see the quality of young activists today. We not just Obakeng, we have a team of 4 to 5 of us, Zaki, lifelong activists. Mandla, you were speaking about the fact that we must be there to sacrifice. I can tell you this Kathrada youth team works weekends, works day and night to do the work we're doing. So I think that's the kind of values that we are instilling. And we want to see that transpire, as the previous speaker said, into all spaces. And while civic and relief work and sports is, I think, getting there, the political one is the answer that we're not getting right. And I think, personally, in 2024, if independent candidates does open up, some of us would want to run and get the support of many of you here today in the hope that there's a new generation who are trying new things as well in this field of politics.
Thank you, Irfan. Next we have Trevor Westerweg, the former leader of the Cape Youth Congress of 1982 Youth Festival and Youth Alliances in the 1980s. He will speak about. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Firstly, thank you for the invite. I can't add much more than what people already said about the book. It's critical, and I think Mandla made the point, time, yes. But it also, as I'm happy about that, it also brings about a bit of sadness that we often, the stories that are told in this book about real people, real experiences, perhaps we are impatient to listen, to allow it to linger for a bit longer in terms of looking back. Nostalgia is often criticized as being fixated, but we also don't often give enough time for looking at what we did. Because in the moment, one can't always very critically analyze and sense what it is that we do. We are full of fervor and want to do things and take on things. In my years where I am now, looking back, I often wonder, what were some of the mistakes that we have made ourselves in terms of what we find today? Is there a link between those kind of things? I leave that thought. I came into Lenasia the first time in 1982. They organized a youth festival, sent out the invitation to Cape Town. I hear and I'm told that they expected 2, 3, 4 people in a car. We came with a busload of 60 plus people. And came here to meet the comrades. And it is fascinating in the ways in which our stories are very similar. And that 1982 event and moment cemented lifelong comradeship, friendships, relationships, even some marriages came out of that. And so, in a sense, his book being published now and might be living in the side of the world, it's apt because we came here then many years ago and cemented those days. The sad part, and then in closure, is that it isn't replicated. These stories, there are so many stories that perhaps needs documentation in one form or the other. And therein lies also a possibility for a new national project about this. Thank you very much for this book, sir.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Mohammed Vali Musa, and he's going to talk about building the mass movement and the role of Lenz activists. Thank you.
Thank you, Zarina. Amandla. Amandla. Let's try again. Amandla. Amandla. Thank you very much. Comrades and friends, it is wonderful to be here. And I was hoping that I wouldn't have to speak because it's so wonderful listening to the speakers here. It's just so wonderful. So it's a pity. Ismail gave me the impression that this was going to be like a little do at the Ahmed Katara Foundation. He said, just come and do an informal chat, to the young people working for the Ahmed Katara Foundation. But of course, there are very few young people here from what I can see, Ismail. Ismail asked me to talk about the context of the formation of the Lenasia Youth League and just look at what was happening at the time. And I find it very interesting when I talk to the young people. I listened to Irfan very carefully, and I've also been trying to talk to some of the young comrades just to understand them all. Zaki, I see you standing there at the back. The other day I was talking to him. He was telling me about the socialist youth movement, revolutionary socialist youth movement. I don't even know all these things that he's a member of, and others are forming other sorts of things, etc. And that gives me a way in which to talk about the context of what happened here. When the 1976 uprisings took place, to be quite honest with you, the ANC was nowhere to be found. The ANC was really surprised that this thing happened. The ANC leadership was a bit suspicious about what was this all about, who was behind it. And of course, the Black consciousness movement was very dominant amongst young people. Our slogan at that time was very simple stuff, but highly inspirational and stuff that mobilized people. To hell with apartheid. Enough is enough. That was basically, the whole theory was that. Enough is enough, to hell with apartheid. And so young people went out to do what they needed to do. And particularly young people at the time accused the older people of being, the older people were referred to as non-whites. We were blacks. The older people were non-whites because they were like, we used to say they were acting like just good natives, you know, thinking that white people were superior. And actually many people did think white people were superior. A lot of Indians, even up to now, probably think white people are superior. It's sort of more or less what happened at the time. And so in the 70s, many of us came to understand the limits of having something as simplistic as enough is enough and to hell with apartheid, because that wasn't going to bring an end to the apartheid system. And so you begin to have a bit more, and in this book, I think for the first time, Ismail refers to the conspiratorial, secretive networks that existed at the time. And he claims that he was given the instruction by one such conspiratorial meeting to go and form the Lenasia Youth League. Well done, Ismail. You succeeded very well. What is interesting, of course, he says, I don't know what he refers to it there, but we had a sort of a highly organized underground networks. Ismail was part of that. We served in the same structure, him and I. And yes, we did say to Ismail, because he was the youngest guy in that structure, you now go and form a youth league. I was 25 years old, I would have you know. We were the older guys. And so we were sending the younger guy to go and form a youth organization. But at the time, there was very little direction that one could expect from people who were in exile for a very, very long time, by that time already, about what needed to be done. What needed to be done here? That's the one thing. The other is that because of the many years of exile and imprisonment, there was a leaning towards conspiracy rather than mass movement. There was a leaning, naturally so. And so what happened in the late 70s and the early 80s was this idea that let's be frank with ourselves. There's only one way in which you're going to bring down the apartheid regime, and that's if the masses themselves get into motion. That if large numbers of people stand up and fight the system, rather than individual acts of heroism, you should have large numbers of people. And it's one of the, and that thinking was what inspired the need to create mass organizations like the Lenasia Youth League, civic organizations, etc., but also the need to work with the mass organizations that already existed, like religious organizations. We spent an enormous amount of time with religious organizations. The South African Council of Churches and hosted the headquarters of the United Democratic Front. There wasn't a religious organization, a church denomination which we didn't work with. You would have found me in church services of every day. I can tell you how the Catholics pray and how the Anglicans pray and everybody prays. And that helped a lot, because when the apartheid regime was trying to co-opt Coloreds and Indians, religious organizations played a big role. Ismail would remember, he hasn't written about this here, but the Jamiat al-Ulama issued a fatwa which said that it is haram for a Muslim to vote for the SAIC. Do you remember that, Prema? I mean, Prema is not even a believer, but he was going around door to door telling Muslims, there's a fatwa here. You're going to get a lot of sins if you don't, you won't go to heaven if you support a party. But it was the idea that you needed to get, and there was a particular moment in history that made it possible. But to seize that moment required solid political organization. And so you had, in Lenz, we had a very solid organization, which the later, Comrade Chomi Saluji is here, he knows all about it. Comrade Reggie Vandia at the time was very much part of the thing also. And all over the country you had that. In Soweto, which Mandla referred to, you had people like Amos Masondo, Jabu Ngwenya, Eric Mulobi, a whole lot of people. And they started looking at how to transform what was then referred to as the Committee of 10 into a mass organization, and the Soweto Civic Association was launched as a result of which, with branches everywhere else, and of course youth organizations. But throughout the country, that's what was happening. But I must tell you that the role that the broader Johannesburg-based activists played has never been written up, partly because it's still too early. You can't write history after a mere 40, 50 years. But because I still don't understand the phenomenon, because every 5 years when I talk about it, I talk about it in a different way, which just shows that we're still trying to understand what happened. But it's in that context that, just as Comrade Trevor has said, the manner in which the Youth League brought together young people from all over the show to create a national network. In the same way you found that at the anti-SAIC conference, which was held at the Selborne Hall in Johannesburg in 1982, just to give you context, because a lot being said about young people here saying that the older people are not giving them space. Actually, we didn't wait for anybody to give us space, to tell you the truth. We just wrote off the older generation, and we did what needed to be done. And when we had the anti-SAIC conference, I would have been, 25, 26 years old, by the way, as a matter of interest. Even Prema was a young man then. Nobody thinks he was ever young. And we used that as an opportunity to bring together these conspiratorial networks from all over the country that had formed. So that was really a front, because, the enemy didn't think that a bunch of Indians talking about the SAIC were really going to, take on Pretoria and destroy it, So they paid little attention to the thing. So you had, and that's where, at that meeting, a number of things happened. One was it was decided to form a united front. The other was to re-establish the Transvaal Indian Congress, which was a very brave decision. Here you were fighting for a non-racial South Africa by establishing an ethnic organization. But, for another time, we can tell you why that was absolutely the correct and necessary thing to do. By the way, it's one of the things that helped me to get out of jail. You see, we formed the Transvaal Indian Congress in 1982. Now, at that time, like Firdaus said, everybody was being arrested. So we said, now, when we recruit members, the security branch will just arrest all those members. So it's a stupid thing to do, to have a list of members. So then when we looked at the constitution of the Transvaal Indian Congress, which was drafted by Mahatma Gandhi somewhere around 1914 or something of that sort, because he formed it after he formed the Natal Indian Congress, the constitution said, under the clause membership, every Indian residing in the province of the Transvaal is hereby deemed to be a member of the Transvaal Indian Congress. Oh, we loved it. We thought that was brilliant. What foresight, the man of peace had. So we didn't need to keep membership records at all. We just did that. And then Samson Doe wanted to become a member of the Transvaal Indian Congress, and that created a bit of a problem because it was now an Indian, but he became a member in any case. So one of the times when I got arrested in 1985, I was held in solitary confinement for quite a number of months. And the Internal Security Act required that the Minister of Police, after 3 months, has to give reasons for continued detention. They didn't have to take you to court, but as long as the Minister of Police was of the view that you were a danger to society, as they put it, they could keep you. So, so my lawyer was Krish Naidu. Krish wrote to them and said, my client needs reasons for why he's being held, and the Minister of Police, Adrian Vlok, sent a standard letter. You know, Mohammed Valley Musa Wawa belongs to the following, is a member of the Transvaal Indian Congress, serves on its executive committee. I never served on its executive committee, because the same structure that Ismail speaks about said I shouldn't serve on that executive committee, I should do other things. So I wasn't on it. But when they interrogated me and they wanted me to talk, I said, I'm a member of the Transvaal Indian Congress. Okay, I'm prepared to talk. I'm a member of the Transvaal Indian Congress. We're trying to destroy apartheid, etc., etc. We used to be in alliance with the ANC when the ANC was a legal organization, etc., etc. So they thought I'm doing a lot of talking. I wrote out a long statement. Based on that statement, Adrian Vlok said I'm a danger to society. And then Krish Naidu challenged it in court. He said that he's of a mistaken view. And he got an affidavit from the president of the Transvaal Indian Congress at the time, who was a comrade called Ramlal Bulia. I don't know if any of you remember him. Mr. Valley, you would remember him. Anyway, he was a real pacifist. I mean, the man was a Gandhiite, a proper Gandhiite. Not like all these people who were pretending to be Gandhiites, but they were smuggling guns at the same time, you know. It wasn't that kind of thing. He was a proper Gandhiite, and he was so offended that Adrian Vlok said that I am violent because of my membership of the Indian Congress. And Ramlal Bulia was a lawyer himself. He wrote a long affidavit, a long history of the Indian Congress, and Krish used this to go to the High Court to challenge the grounds. And they actually released me, because the High Court said, of course you're mistaken. How can this man belonging to the Indian Congress even think of violence? So, that was the context in which the Lenasia Youth League was part of a very, very big network that evolved. And a way had to be found not to just have loose activities taking place everywhere in the country, but to have a sharp edge to it and bring it into a national formation so that we could have national programs and a national program of action. And that was the idea of the United Front. It's never been a United Front in South Africa before. So we couldn't ask the older people, how do you do this? It didn't exist. And we started inventing this idea of a United Democratic Front. And it was a successful thing, but I don't want Comrade Chamda, Comrade Serena to stop me. Let me just say that the phenomenon of the mass struggles of the 1980s actually what started off in 1976 and culminated in the regime giving up in 1990. Those mass struggles were intense, unabated, and unstoppable. The day on which a comrade came out of prison was the day on which he or she continued where he left off. It was completely unstoppable. At the height of the imprisonment in 1987-88, they decided they will arrest all the leaders, then it will come to an end. They just kept on arresting. They arrested 40,000 people. 40,000 people were in detention without a trial. Comrade Mandla was one of them with me. Here at the Diepkloof prison, we were held together there and a number of other people. 40,000. It didn't stop the mass struggle. And I'm of the view that this was one of the most sophisticated mass struggles of modern times to be found anywhere in the world. It wasn't a long weekend of an Arab Spring in Tahrir Square in Cairo or something of that sort. This was highly organized, with a highly organized network, and unstoppable. And it was people doing it for themselves. That's what it was. And I'm sure that Ismail will write all of this up at some point in time. The concept of a united front is also something that nobody else has been able to repeat so far in struggles anywhere else in the world. It was such a broad united front. In fact, it was unbelievably broad. You know, when we arrived at the funeral of Matthew Skoniwe in Craddock, as you all know, that he was murdered, we arrived at his funeral, and this was an occasion when it was decided to have a national gathering. Lots of people came over there, and everybody traveled throughout the night, and you arrived there in the morning, and you got to the stadium in Craddock. The stadium was basically just a field of dust, but there was this huge flag of the ANC, and the ANC was unbanned, and next to it, a huge hammer and sickle flag of the South African Communist Party. And underneath the flag, you had the head of the Catholic Church in South Africa. It's the biggest denomination amongst the Christians, or at least was at that time. Archbishop Huddleston was standing under there with his robes, a little bit like Ismail, you know, with his robes and all of those sorts of things. You know these guys. They tried to show us up by dressing better than us, you know. He was a Catholic priest. And here you had this thing. The communists and the Catholics were together in this front. We had an organization called Jews for Social Justice. We had every kind of thing organized, everybody. We found a way, not of judging and excluding people, but a way of including people. And that's what we were able to do. Let me just say lastly that in conclusion about the book itself, I'm happy that others have said that reading the book made them feel emotional. I think Fidos was the first to say that, because it makes me feel that I haven't become all mushy and soft in my old age, because I found it very emotional reading the book. I must tell you that. It's an absolutely wonderful book, and there are so many things in there, so many stories in there that have never been told before, not only never been recorded, but never been told. And maybe, I can just refer to two of them. One is, I called Ismail, I said, Ismail, this stuff has never been spoken about before. Are you sure you want to write about it? Have you consulted the others who were involved in this conspiracy? And so his story about the place from which he got the instruction to go out and launch the Lenasia Youth League has never been told before. He tells it in a small way, but it's still, and I think that makes this book very special. The other story is the story of Rashid Sidat and Razia Saleh and the escape of Murphy Morobe, Vusi Kanyele, and myself from prison. And they tell the story from the part they played in that. That's never been told before. And so there are so many things in here, Ismail, that's never been told before. I think we must thank you very much for putting this together, and please do continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I could have never stopped you. I think everyone's so engrossed, so we're just allowing time. Chair, we said 12:30, but I think there's nothing wrong with stepping over time. There's no protocols here, so we're doing good. Ismail is going to talk to us about the book. Well, he says 5 minutes, but we're not going to stop you either, Ismail. Being a former politician, I think, I won't say more.
Thank you very much. I told Yunus I don't want to speak, but he said, look, you must say something about the book. So firstly, I must say that to the activists of Lenz, the LYL, and all the related organizations, the Residents Association, TIC, etc., for me it has been a great privilege and a great honor to have worked with you people under very difficult circumstances. You make me proud. Now I'm getting emotional. Highly disciplined group of people, I can tell you. The loyalty, the discipline, the punctuality. Isu Chiba drilled this thing of punctuality into us. I see in the book, some of the activists, our colleagues are saying that it was almost like a military-style organization. And maybe it wasn't too democratic. But when I spoke to Momo a few days ago, he says, but yes, of course we were not very democratic sometimes, but we are faced with a highly repressive enemy that wouldn't hold back to assassinate, to arrest you, to kidnap you, to kill you, etc. So under those conditions, there will be limits to democracy, and particularly internal democracy within an organization. Valley is right. Our group that was initially established, I don't think most of the activists in Lenz was even aware. They might have an inkling that some people are meeting secretly or something, yeah. I think they had a suspicion that there was a secret group within the Youth League meeting somewhere. But this group was never uncovered by the security police from the day it was established right through the end. And that's because of the discipline and the integrity within that group, the respect for the secrecy principle. So it has been a great honor to work with a team like that and all the wider activists that contributed to the building of the movement in Lenasia. We cannot forget the people who gave their lives. So if you take the earlier generation, Maulvi Ismail Saluji, Molsap, to Azaz and his family. When we went as lighties to Molsap, because he was the last president of the TIC when Dadu left the country, he was elected the president of the TIC. And when we thought that we needed to revive the Transvaal Indian Congress, we said, but let's go and see this older generation. So others had gone to see Dr. Jasat and various people, Ramlal Bhulia, the older generation. But because I could speak Gujarati, they said I must go and speak to Molsap. And we went with a small group of people. You know, I can remember his words. He says, I waited all my life for you people to stand up, for the youth to stand up. That day has come. So he inspired us, and we inspired him. That's the dynamic of the struggle. Then there's Isu Chiba. I mean, everybody in this book talks about Isu, the impact he had on their development. Kathy, Reggie, Shirish Nanabai, the doctors, Dr. Rashid Saluji, Dr. Hurley Azvat, Dr. Prakash Vallabh from the Health Workers Association. They're all dead now, they passed away. But Prakash was killed. Then the teachers. I want to do a little booklet, hopefully over time, on just the teachers who made an impact on many of these activists. Billy Morgan, Ratan Sami, the late Mr. Mahdi. I mean, there were so many of them. Mr. Yusuf Eshak, he's passed away now also. The late Soli Ismail from Tech School, from the Black Consciousness Movement. Harun Patel. So there's so much still to write about. But these are unsung heroes and heroines in our struggle. Nobody even remembers. If you ask the new generation, who were the teachers? The other day I was giving my grandson and his friends, I had to take them to school. So there were 5 of them in the car. After a long time I took them. I just quickly asked them, I said, how's school? Is it interesting? They said, no, it's boring. So I said, why are you going to school then? So they said, we have to go. I said, all right, is there one teacher in your school that inspires you, that motivates you? And all 5 of them, they said nobody. And I said, how sad? How sad that you can't have one teacher today in Lenz High that can make an impact on the consciousness of young people, on their vision, and give them hope and inspiration. So we didn't have highly political teachers in the front line of the struggle, but they shaped consciousness. They gave you a dream to live for. And they placed a value on education that no matter what the conditions, education can take us forward. So thank you very much to all of you. The book is there. It's an easy read. Thank you to all the people who've taken the time to make their own personal contributions. What this book does show is a point of departure from my side. I think we are done now with the generation before us. Dr. Jasad, Isu Chiba, Dr. Saluji, Mani Bensita, all that. I think they'll still write about it. But the time has come for us to write about our generation, because I think we also made a major impact, as Vali and others have said. And it's important to write about that history to inspire the next generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ismail. I'm just going to do a quick reflection before I do the vote of thanks. And I'll tell you why I do that. I was employed, not deployed, employed at the ANC constituency office from 1995 to 2009, then I became a councillor. And Ismail, a lot that's written in this book. You gave it to me to read. I just kept it for a few days. I didn't finish it. But every story in here was related to me by Uncle Isu. I accompanied Uncle Isu, and that's thanks to his family, to all events, to all functions. I was really exposed to the politics and people of the time over the past 25 years. So I'm in awe of everybody here, and in some way or the other, everybody that's written here, our paths have crossed. Whether we go to the Cemetery Club every December to commemorate Yusuf and Prakash's death anniversary, or whether we are the AKF, but in some form, whether we organize the Yusuf Prakash tournaments, which I think everybody talks about and we still miss. So in some way, that kind of discipline and all for me, Mandla, Prema, you know, I never ever went to any ANC political school, Ismail. My time was at the PCO, but my grooming and my mentorship came from a lot of you sitting here. Prema, all the rides to the council meetings, Mandla, you were the Gauteng legislature at the time. So I just want to say thank you on a personal note. I want to make an appeal to everybody sitting here. Obacheng and Irfan spoke about the youth. Can you find it in your budget to buy an extra book so we can distribute it to our youth? It is an expensive price, but I want to say we've tried to go out to business people. So just try and just buy one or two so we can contribute it to Baheng. I think that will be amazing, yeah, that we're making a plan for that. Irfan has spoken about the June 16th event that they've planned. Try to get our youth out there. Ismail Vadi, you spoke about how active Lenz is, and I agree with that, but at a certain level, somehow politically we just can't organize. But I think that's going to take a lot of time. I was a board member of the Kathrada Foundation. I have resigned. I'm now part of the staff. So I want to say, Ismail and Mandla, Prema, the kind of experience on a Monday morning with Obacheng says our boss, Sean Bolton, Eunice, is a different experience completely. So I'm in awe of the youth group at the AKF. And again, I'm going to appeal. Find yourselves to please sign up a debit order. Mandla, you said the future is the youth, but I think it's the now. The young lions, your kind of experiences, I think at some stage, let's say a session, something of this sort, so you can impart all your kinds of things on the youth that are there at the foundation at the moment. Maybe just quick thing, you know, when I was employed, I think very politically naive. Mickey and Greg, former President Mandela came to the Gandhi Hall. We had a wonderful event. And Mickey and Greg go up to somebody and says to this guy, why are you here? You shouldn't be here. They come from the other side. The surname was Belay of this particular gentleman. So he said, but my daughter's invited to dance here. And I see Mickey and Greg like very angry. Why is this person here? Well, the little girl that was dancing at the opening was at school with my son. And that's all I worried about, that she's a good dancer, she's young. So politically, absolutely naive. I think the most I had done was to burn a flag or at Lenz, take down a flag on Republic Day, the 31st of May. So I just think my grooming came from everybody sitting here. So thank you to everybody. for today's event. Thank you for all of you for attending this book launch, but also I think it's a reunion of all sorts. Thanks to all the speakers. I think you've just educated and just shared all your moments, and I think everybody's just the wiser for that. To the staff of the AKF and the youth and the volunteers, thank you for coming this morning at 9 o'clock on a Sunday and helping us to set up. To all the speakers, your input, thank you very, very much. The media, print, live streaming, thank you for sharing this moment with us. Tistime and Harun, thank you for the eats that you've so generously sponsored. Thank you, Chair, for chairing. And thank you, everybody, for attending. You can still have your tea, coffee, and cook sisters if anything is left. But please just do buy a book to contribute to our youth. I thank you all for attending, and safe time home. Thank you.